Chapter 36. Unknown to Ezio, Messer Correia had one other small piece of business to conclude for his boss before the main event of the evening. But it was still quite early. He stood silently on a deserted dock by the Tiber. A few barges and 2 ships rode at anchor, gently moving with the river's flow. The ship's grubby furled sails rippled slightly in the wind. A group of guards wearing Cesare's insignia were coming towards them, half hauling, half carrying a blindfolded man between them. At their head was Cesare himself. Micheletto recognized the man, without surprise, as Francesco Trocche. "Please," Francesco was whimpering, "I have done nothing wrong." "Francesco, my dear friend," said Cesare, "the facts are plain. You told your brother about my plans in the Romagna, and he contacted the Venetian ambassador. It was an accident. I'm still your servant and your ally. Are you demanding that I discount your actions and rely on mere friendship?" "I am asking, not demanding." "My dear Francesco, in order to unite Italy, I must have every institution under my control. You know what higher organization we serve, the Order of Templars, of which I am now head." "I thought your father—" "And if the Church does not fall in line," continued Cesare firmly, "I will eliminate it entirely." "But you know that I really work for you, not the Pope." "Ah, but do I, Trocche? There's only one way I can be unconditionally sure of that now." "Surely you can't intend to kill me, your most loyal friend?" Cesare smiled. "Of course not." He snapped his fingers. Noiselessly, Micheletto approached from behind Francesco's back. You are letting me go?" Relief flooded into Trocche's voice. "Thank you, Cesare. Thank you from my heart. You will not regret—" But his words were cut short as Micheletto, a thin cord twisted between his hands, leant forward and bound it tightly round his neck. Cesare watched for a moment, but even before Francesco was completely dead, he turned to the captain of the guard and said, "Have you got the costumes for the play ready?" "Yes, sir." "Then give them to Micheletto when he's finished." "Yes, sir." "Lucrezia is mine, and mine alone. I didn't think she was that important to me, but when I got the message in Urbino from one of her own men that wretched toad of an actor had been pawing her, slobbering over her, I came back immediately. Can you understand a passion like that, Captain?" "Yes, sir." "You're a fool. Have you done, Micheletto?" "Messere, the man is dead." "Then weigh him down with stones and dump him in the Tiber." "I obey, Cesare." The captain had given orders to his men, and 4 of them had gone to fetch 2 large wicker hampers, which they now carried between them. "Here are the costumes for your men. Make doubly sure the work is done correctly." "Indeed, Messere." Cesare stalked off, leaving his subordinate to make his arrangements. Motioning to the guards to follow him, Micheletto led the way towards the baths of Trajan. Ezio and his band of recruits were already at the baths, hidden in the shelter of a ruined portico. He had noticed a number of men in black already gathered, and he watched them closely as Micheletto appeared. The guards put the baskets of costumes down, and Micheletto motioned them to depart. The shadows were deep, and Ezio nodded to his men to prepare themselves. He had strapped the bracer to his left forearm, and the poison blade to his right. Micheletto's men formed a line, and as each man came up to his leader, he was handed a costume. They were uniforms in the style of those worn by Roman legionaries at the time of Christ. Ezio noticed that Micheletto himself wore the costume of a centurion. As each man stepped away to don his costume, Ezio stood ready. Silently, he extended the concealed poison blade that Leonardo had recrafted for him. The unsuspecting thugs went down without a whisper. Then his own recruits put on the theatrical clothes and pulled Micheletto's henchmen's bodies out of sight. Absorbed in his work, Micheletto was unaware, once everyone was in costume, that the men he now commanded were not his own. He led them, with Ezio close behind, in the direction of the Colosseum. A stage had been erected in the ruins of the old Roman amphitheatre where, since the time of the Emperor Titus, gladiators had fought each other to the death. Bestiarii had dispatched wild animals in their tens of thousands, and Christians had been thrown to the lions. It was a gloomy place, but the gloom was dispersed somewhat by the hundreds of flickering torches that illuminated the stage, while the audience, ranged on benches on a wooden grandstand, were absorbed in watching a play on the subject of Christ's Passion. "I seek Pietro Benintendi," Micheletto said to the doorkeeper, showing him a warrant. "He acts on stage, signore," replied the doorkeeper, "but one of my men will take you to where you may wait for him." Micheletto turned to his companions. "Don't forget," he told them, "I will be wearing this black cloak with the white star on its shoulder. Cover my back and wait for your cue, which will be Pontius Pilate's order to the centurion to strike." "I must get to Pietro before he does," thought Ezio, tagging along at the back of the group as they followed their leader into the Colosseum. On stage, 3 crosses had been erected. He watched as his recruits disposed themselves according to Micheletto's orders, and Micheletto himself took his place in the wings. The play was reaching its climax. "My God! My God! Why hast thou forsaken me?" cried Pietro from the cross. "Hark," said one of the actors playing the Pharisees, "how he crieth upon Elijah to deliver him." One, dressed as a Roman legionary, dipped a sponge in vinegar and placed it on the tip of his spear. "Wait and see whether Elijah dare come here or not." "My thirst is great! My thirst is great!" cried Pietro. The soldier raised the sponge to Pietro's lips. "Yea, thou shalt drink no more," said another Pharisee. Pietro raised his head. "Mighty God in majesty," he declaimed, "to work thy will I shall never cease. My spirit I betake to thee. Receive it, O Lord, into thy hands." Pietro gave a great sigh. "Consummatum est." His head dropped. Christ had died. On cue, Micheletto strode onto the stage, his centurion's uniform glittering under the thrown-back black cloak. Ezio, watching, wondered what had become of the actor originally playing the centurion, but imagined that he had met a fate similar to that of most of Micheletto's victims. "Lords, I say unto you," recited Micheletto boldly, "this was indeed the Son of God the Father Almighty. I know it must be so. I know by the manner of his cry that he has fulfilled the prophecy, and the Godhead is revealed in him." "Centurion," said the actor playing Caiaphas, "as God gives me speed, thy folly is great indeed. Thou dost not understand. When thou seest his heart bleed, then we shall see what thou wilt say. Longinus, take this spear into thy hand." Caiaphas handed a wooden spear to the actor playing the Roman legionary Longinus, a large man with flowing locks, clearly a favourite of the audience, and doubtless, thought Ezio, a bitter rival of Pietro's. "Take this spear and take good heed," added one of the Pharisees for good measure. "Thou must pierce the side of Jesus Nazarenus, that we shall know he is truly dead." "I will do as thou biddest me," declaimed Longinus, "but on your heads be it. Whatever the consequence, I wash my hands of it." He then made a great show of stabbing Jesus' side with the prop spear, and as the blood and water spilled forth from a hidden sack concealed in Pietro's loincloth, so Longinus began his big speech. Ezio could see the beady glint in the dead Jesus' eyes as Pietro watched him jealously. "High King of Heaven, I see thee here. Let water be thrown onto my hands and onto my spear, and let my eyes be bathed too, that I may see thee more clearly." He made a dramatic pause. "Alas, alack, and woe is me! What is this deed that I have done? I think that I have slain a man, sooth to say, but what manner of man I know not. Lord God in heaven, I cry you mercy, for it was my body which guided my hand, not my soul." Allowing himself another pause for a round of applause, he ploughed on. "Lord Jesus, much have I heard spoken of thee, that thou hast healed through thy pity both the sick and the blind. And let thy name be praised, thou hast healed me this day of my own blindness, my blindness of spirit. Henceforward, Lord, thy follower will I be. And in 3 days thou shalt rise again to rule and judge us all." The actor who was playing Joseph of Arimathea, the wealthy Jewish leader who donated his own tomb, which had already been built, for the housing of Christ's body, then spoke. "Ah, Lord God, what heart had you to allow them to slay this man that I see here dead and hanging from a cross? A man who ne'er did aught amiss. For surely God's own Son is he. Therefore in the tomb that is made for me, therein shall his body buried be, for he is King of bliss." Nicodemus, Joseph's colleague in the Sanhedrin and a fellow sympathizer, added his voice. "Sir Joseph, I say surely, this is God's Son Almighty. Let us request his body of Pontius Pilate, and nobly buried he shall be, and I will help thee to take him down devotedly." Joseph then turned to the actor playing Pilate, and spoke again. "Sir Pilate, I ask of thee a special boon to grant me as thou may. This prophet that is dead today, allow me of his body custody." While Micheletto took up position very near the central cross, Ezio slipped backstage. There he rummaged swiftly through a costume skip, and found a rabbinical robe which he hurriedly put on. He returned to the stage from backstage left, managing to slip in just behind Micheletto without anyone noticing or the action skipping a beat. "Joseph, if indeed Jesus Nazarenus is dead, as the centurion must confirm, I will not deny you custody." Turning to Micheletto, Pilate spoke again. "Centurion, is Jesus dead?" "Aye, Sir Governor," said Micheletto flatly, and Ezio noticed him draw a stiletto from under his cloak. Ezio had replaced his poison blade, now exhausted of venom, with his trusty hidden blade, and with it he now pierced Micheletto's side, holding him upright and manoeuvring him off stage in the direction he had come. Once backstage, he laid the man down. Micheletto fixed him with a glittering look. "Ha!" he said. "You cannot save Pietro. The vinegar on the sponge was poisoned. As I promised Cesare, I made doubly sure." He fought for breath. You had better finish me. I did not come here to kill you. You helped your master rise, and you will fall with him. You don't need me. You are the agent of your own destruction. If you live, well, a dog always returns to its master, and you will lead me to my real quarry. Ezio had no time for more. He had to save Pietro. As he rushed back on stage, he was greeted by a scene of chaos. Pietro was writhing on the cross and vomiting as he turned the colour of a peeled almond. The audience was in uproar. "What's going on? What's happening?" cried Longinus, as the other actors scattered. "Cut him down," Ezio yelled to his recruits. Some threw keenly aimed daggers to slice through the ropes that bound Pietro to the cross, while others stood ready to catch him. Still more were fighting back the Borgia guards, who had appeared from nowhere and were storming the stage. "This wasn't in the script," gurgled Pietro as he fell into the arms of the recruits. "Will he die?" asked Longinus hopefully. One rival less is always good news in a tough profession. "Hold off the guards!" shouted Ezio, leading the recruits off stage and carrying Pietro in his arms across a shallow pool of water in the middle of the Colosseum, disturbing dozens of drinking pigeons which flew up and away in alarm. The very last glimmer from the setting sun bathed Ezio and Pietro in a dull red light. Ezio had trained his recruits well, and those bringing up the rearguard successfully fought off the pursuing Borgia guards, as the rest made their way out of the Colosseum and into the network of streets to the north. Ezio led the way to the house of a doctor of his acquaintance. He hammered on the door, and having been granted reluctant admission, had Pietro laid on a table covered with a palliasse in the doctor's consulting room, from whose beams a baffling number of dried herbs hung in organized bunches, giving the room a pungent smell. On shelves, unidentifiable or unmentionable objects, creatures and parts of creatures, floated in glass bottles filled with cloudy liquid. Ezio ordered his men outside to keep watch. He wondered what any passers-by might think if they saw a bunch of Roman soldiers. They'd probably think they were seeing ghosts and run a mile. He himself had shed his Pharisee outfit at the first opportunity. "Who are you?" murmured Pietro. Ezio was concerned to see that the actor's lips had turned blue. "Your saviour," said Ezio. To the doctor he said, "He's been poisoned, Dottore Brunelleschi." Brunelleschi examined the actor quickly, shining a light into his eyes. "From the pallor it looks like they used cantarella, the poison of choice for our dear masters, the Borgia." To Pietro he said, "Lie still." "Feel sleepy," said Pietro. "Lie still." "Has he been sick?" Brunelleschi asked Ezio. "Yes." "Good." The doctor bustled about, mixing fluids from the different-coloured glass bottles with practised ease, and pouring the mixture into a phial. This he handed to Pietro, propping his head up. "Drink this." "Hurry up," said Ezio urgently. "Just give him a moment." Ezio watched anxiously, and after what seemed an age, the actor sat up. "I think I feel slightly better," he said. "Miracolo," said Ezio in relief. "Not really," said the doctor. "He can't have had much, and for my sins I've had quite a bit of experience with cantarella victims. It's enabled me to develop a pretty effective antidote. Now," he continued judiciously, "I'll apply some leeches. They will lead to a full recovery. You can rest here, my boy, and very soon you'll be as right as rain." He bustled some more, and produced a glass jar full of black, wriggling creatures. He scooped out a handful, I cannot thank you enough, said Pietro to Ezio. You can thank me enough, replied Ezio briskly. The key to the little gate you use for your trysts at the Castel Sant'Angelo with Lucrezia. Give it to me, now. Misgiving appeared on Pietro's face. What are you talking about? I'm simply a poor actor, a victim of circumstance. Listen, Pietro, Cesare knows about you and Lucrezia. Now misgiving was replaced by fear. Oh, God! But I can help you if you give me the key. Mutely, Pietro delved into his loincloth and handed it over. I always keep it with me, he said. Wise of you, said Ezio, pocketing the key. It was reassuring to have it, for it would guarantee him access to the Castel whenever he had need of it. My men will fetch your clothes and get you to a place of safety. I'll detail a couple of them to keep watch over you. Just keep out of sight for a while. But my public, wailed the actor. They'll have to make do with Longinus until it's safe for you to put your head above the parapet again, grinned Ezio. I shouldn't worry. He isn't a patch on you. Oh, do you really think so? No question. Ouch! Said Pietro, as the first leech went on. In the wink of an eye, Ezio had disappeared outside. There he gave the necessary orders to his men. Get out of those costumes as soon as you can, he added. The baths of Trajan aren't far. With any luck, your street clothes will still be where you left them. He departed on his own, but he hadn't gone far when he noticed a figure skulking in the shadows. As soon as the man felt Ezio's eyes on him, he cut and ran. But not before Ezio had recognized Paganino, the thief who'd been determined to stay behind at the sack of Monteriggioni. Hey! Ezio shouted, giving chase. Un momento! The thief certainly knew his way around these streets. Ducking and diving, he was so adroit that Ezio all but lost him in the pursuit, and more than once had to leap to the rooftops to scan the streets below in order to locate the man again. Leonardo's magical glove came in surprisingly handy at such times, he found. At last, he managed to get ahead of his prey and cut off his line of escape. The thief went for his dagger, an ugly-looking cinquedea, but Ezio quickly wrested it out of his hand so that it clattered harmlessly to the pavement. Why did you run? Asked Ezio, pinioning the man. Then he noticed a letter protruding from the man's leather belt pouch. The seal was unmistakable. It was that of Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo, the Spaniard. Ezio let out a long breath as a series of suspicions fell into place. Long ago, Paganino had been with Antonio de Magianis's thieves' guild in Venice. He must have been offered enough money by the Borgia to switch sides, and then he'd infiltrated La Volpe's group here. The Borgia had had a mole at the heart of the assassin organization all along. Here was the traitor, not Machiavelli at all. While Ezio's attention was distracted, the thief wrenched himself free and in a flash seized his fallen weapon. His desperate eyes met Ezio's. "Long live the Borgia!" he cried, and thrust the cinquedea firmly into his own breast. Ezio looked down at the fallen man as he thrashed about in his death agonies. Well, better this death than a slow one at the hands of his masters. Ezio well knew the price exacted by the Borgia for failure. He stuffed the letter into his doublet and made off. Merda, he thought to himself. I was right. And now I have to stop La Volpe before he gets to Machiavelli. Chapter 37. As Ezio made his way across the city, he was accosted by Saragina, one of the girls from the Rosa in Fiore. "You must come quickly," she said. Your mother wants to see you urgently." Ezio bit his lip. "There should be time. Hurry," he said. Once at the bordello, he found Maria waiting for him, and her face betrayed her anxiety. "Ezio," she said, "thank you for coming to see me." "I have to be quick, Mother. There's something amiss." "Tell me." "The old proprietor of this establishment." "Madonna Solari?" "Yes." Maria collected herself. "It turns out she was a cheat and a liar. We've discovered that she was playing il doppio gioco, and she had close ties with the Vatican. Worse, several of those still employed here may be—" "Don't worry, Madre. I'll root them out. I'll send my most trusted recruits to interview the girls. Under Claudio's direction, they will soon get at the truth." "Thank you, Ezio." "We will ensure that only girls loyal to us remain here. As for the rest—" The expression on Ezio's face was harsh. "I have other news." "Yes?" "We have word that ambassadors from King Ferdinand of Spain and from the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian have arrived in Rome. It seems they seek an alliance with Cesare." "Are you sure, Mother? What need have they of him?" "I don't know, figlio mio." Ezio's jaw was set. "We had better be safe rather than sorry. Ask Claudia to investigate for me. I give her a full mandate to give orders to the recruits I will send." "You trust her for this?" "Mother, after the business with the banker, I would trust the two of you with my life. I am ashamed not to have done so before, but it was only my anxiety for your safety that—" Maria held up a hand. "You do not need to explain. And there is nothing to forgive. We're all friends again now. That is what matters." "Thank you. Cesare's days are numbered. Even if the ambassadors gain his support, they will soon find it is worthless." "I hope your confidence is well-founded." "Believe me, Mother, it is. Or will be, if I can save Machiavelli from La Volpe's misguided suspicion." Chapter 38. Borrowing a horse from the stables he had liberated, Ezio rode post-haste to the sleeping fox. It was crucial that he get there before anything happened to Machiavelli. Lose him, and he'd lose the best brains in the Brotherhood. Although the hour was not that late, he was alarmed to see that the inn was closed. He had his own key and let himself in through the wicket gate. The scene that met his eyes told him that he had arrived not a moment too soon. The members of the Thieves' Guild were all present. La Volpe and his principal lieutenants stood together, busily discussing something that appeared to be of great importance, and it looked as though judgment had been reached, since La Volpe, a baleful look on his face, was approaching Machiavelli, a businesslike basilard in his right hand. Machiavelli, for his part, looked unconcerned, seemingly without any idea about what was happening. "Stop!" shouted Ezio, bursting in on the scene and catching his breath after his headlong ride. All eyes turned to him, while La Volpe stood rooted to the spot. "Stay your hand, Gilberto," commanded Ezio. "I have discovered the real traitor." "What?" said La Volpe, shocked, against a background of excited murmuring from his people. "He was, one of your own men, Paganino. He was present at the attack on Monteriggioni, and now I see his mischief in many of our recent misfortunes." "Are you sure of this?" "He himself revealed his guilt." La Volpe's brow darkened. He sheathed his dagger. "Where is he now?" he growled. "Where no one can touch him any more. Dead. By his own hand. He was carrying this letter." Ezio held the sealed parchment aloft and passed the letter to La Volpe. Machiavelli came up as the thieves' leader broke the seal and opened the paper. "My God," said La Volpe, scanning the words. "Let me see," said Machiavelli. "Of course," La Volpe said, crestfallen. Machiavelli was scanning the letter. "It's from Rodrigo to Cesare. Details of our plans for the French general Octavian, amongst other things." "One of my own men." "This is good news," Machiavelli said to Ezio. "We can substitute this letter with another containing false information. Put them off the scent." "Good news indeed," replied Ezio, but his tone was cold. "Gilberto, you should have listened to me." "I am once again in your debt, Ezio," said La Volpe humbly. Ezio also allowed himself a smile. What debt can there be amongst friends who must trust one another? Before La Volpe could reply, Machiavelli put in, "And congratulations, by the way. I gather you resurrected Christ 3 days early." Ezio laughed, thinking of his rescue of Pietro. How did Machiavelli find out about things so fast? La Volpe looked around at the men and women of the guild gathered around them. "Well, what are you staring at?" he said. "We're losing business here." Later, after Machiavelli had left to deal with the intercepted letter, La Volpe drew Ezio aside. "Glad you're here," he said, "and not just because you prevented me from making a total fool of myself." "More than that," said Ezio lightly. "Do you know what I would have done to you if you'd killed Niccolo?" La Volpe grunted. "Ezio," he said. Ezio clapped him on the back. "But all's well. No more quarrels. Within the Brotherhood we cannot afford them. Now, what is it you wanted to say to me? Do you have need of my assistance?" "I do. The guild is strong, but many of my men are young and untested. Look at that kid who nicked your purse. Look at young Claudio." "And your point is?" "I was coming to that. Generally the thieves in Rome are young men and women, skilled in their trade, sure, but young and prone to rivalries. Damaging rivalries." "Are you speaking of another gang?" "Yes. One in particular, which may pose a threat. I need reinforcements to deal with them." "My recruits?" La Volpe was silent. Then he said, "I know I refused you help when my suspicions about Niccolo were at their height. But now—" "Who are they?" "They call themselves the Cento Occhi, the 100 Eyes. They are creatures of Cesare Borgia, and they cause us significant trouble." "Where is their base?" "My spies have located it." "Where?" Just a moment. They're angry and they're spoiling for a fight." "Then we must surprise them." "Bene." "But we must be prepared for retaliation." "We will strike first. Then they will have no opportunity for retaliation." La Volpe, now more his old self, rubbed his hands in anticipation. "The main thing is to take out their leaders. They alone have direct contact with the Borgia. Remove them, and we will have beheaded the Cento Occhi." "And you really need my help for this?" "You broke the power of the Wolfmen." "Without your help." "I know." "The man who helped me break the Wolfmen was—" "I know." "Listen, Gilberto. We will combine forces and do this together. Have no fear of that. Then I presume your guild will be the dominant cartel in Rome." "That is true," agreed La Volpe reluctantly. "If I help you in this," said Ezio slowly, "there is a condition." "Yes." that you shall not again threaten the unity of the Brotherhood. For that is what you almost did. La Volpe bowed his head. I am schooled, he said meekly. Whether we succeed in this venture of yours or fail. Whether we succeed or fail, agreed La Volpe. But we won't. Won't what? La Volpe gave his friend a Mephistophelian grin. Fail, he said. Chapter 39. Having detailed a group of his growing recruit militia to help La Volpe in his efforts against the Cento Occhi, Ezio made his way back to his lodgings. He refilled the poisoned blade's inner phial with the venom Leonardo had prepared especially, and checked and cleaned the retractable pistol, the double blade, and the new crossbow and poison darts. His work was interrupted by a messenger from Bartolomeo, bidding him come to the mercenaries' barracks as quickly as possible. Sensing trouble, and worried about it, he had hoped that Bartolomeo and his condottieri had the French in check, Ezio packed the codex weapons he judged he might need into a saddlebag, and made his way to the stables, where he rented his favourite horse and set off. It was a fine day, and the road was more or less dry, since rain had held off for about a week. The countryside seemed a little dusty as he rode through it, taking care to choose a route obscure enough not to be monitored by Borgia troops, and taking the odd shortcut through the woods and across fields, where cows raised their heads idly from their grazing to watch him pass. It was afternoon by the time he reached the barracks, and all seemed quiet. He noticed that since their renovation, the ramparts and walls had taken a slight bruising from French cannonades, but the damage wasn't serious, and a handful of men were busy on scaffolding or slung in baskets from the battlements, repairing the gouges and cracks the cannonballs had made. He dismounted and handed the bridle to an ostler who came running up, gently wiping the little flecks of foam from his horse's mouth. He hadn't ridden her hard. Ezio patted her muzzle before making his way unannounced across the parade ground in the direction of Bartolomeo's quarters. His mind was on his next step, now that Cesare's banker had been removed, and he was considering what counteraction his enemy might take to ensure that there was no cessation in his supply of funds. So he was surprised to find himself nose to the tip with Bianca, Bartolomeo's greatsword. "Who goes there?" bellowed Bartolomeo. "Salve to you too," rejoined Ezio. Bartolomeo gave vent to a huge belly laugh. "Got you!" "Teach me to be on my toes." "Actually," Bartolomeo gave a theatrical wink, "I was expecting my wife." "Well, well." Bartolomeo lowered his sword and embraced Ezio. When he released him from the bear hug, his expression was more serious. "I'm glad you've come, Ezio." "What's the matter?" "Look." Ezio followed his friend's gaze to where a platoon of wounded mercenaries were entering the parade ground. "The French puttane have got us under pressure again," said Bartolomeo, answering Ezio's unspoken question. "I thought you'd barked the shins of their general. What's his name?" "Octavian de Valois thinks he's some kind of descendant of the noble House of Valois. Some wretched spawn of a bastard, if you ask me." Bartolomeo spat as another contingent of wounded men appeared. "Look serious," said Ezio. "King Louis must have sent reinforcements to back up Cesare after we gave Valois a bashing." Bartolomeo scratched his beard. "I suppose I should be flattered." "How bad is it?" "They've got their tower back," said Bartolomeo grumpily. "We'll get it back. Where's Valois now?" "You're right." Bartolomeo ignored the question. "Of course we'll get it back again. We'll have the scoundrels in retreat before you can say fottere. It's only a matter of time." Just then a bullet whizzed past their ears and embedded itself in the wall behind them. "It was so quiet when I rode up," said Ezio, looking at the sky. The sun had gone behind large clouds, which had suddenly rolled across the sky. "Seemed so quiet, you mean? They're sneaky bastards, the French. But I'll have Valois by the throat soon enough, mark my word." He turned to yell an order to a sergeant who'd come running up. "Close the gates! Get those men off the outer walls! Move!" Men ran hither and thither, manning the battlements and priming the cannon. "Don't worry, friend," said the big condottiero. "I've got the situation well in hand." At that moment, a large cannonball crashed into the ramparts nearest the two men, sending dust and shards of stone flying in all directions. "They seem to be getting closer," yelled Ezio. Bartolomeo's men fired a salvo from the barracks' main cannon by way of reply, and the walls seemed to shake with the report from the great guns. The response from the French artillery was just as ferocious. The thunder of 200 guns tore at the air, and this time the balls found their marks more accurately. Bartolomeo's men were still desperately trying to restore defensive orders when another huge salvo from the French rocked the walls of the barracks. This time the French seemed to be focusing their efforts on the main gate, and 2 of the gatekeepers fell dead, having been caught up in the bombardment. "Close the fucking gates!" roared Bartolomeo. The well-trained soldiers under Bartolomeo's command rushed forward to repel the sortie of French troops who, without warning, had appeared at the main entrance of the barracks. The French had clearly been holding back for this surprise attack, and unfortunately, thought Ezio to himself, they had managed to gain the upper hand. Bartolomeo's fortress had been caught unprepared for an attack. Bartolomeo jumped down from the battlements and ran towards the gate at full tilt. Whirling Bianca, he towered above the Frenchmen, and the great broadsword sliced viciously into their ranks. The French soldiers seemed to halt in trepidation at Bartolomeo's arrival. Meanwhile, Ezio directed the musketeers to cover those men who strove to push the gates closed before the enemy could gain a surer foothold inside the barracks. The assassin troops rallied with the presence of their leader, and succeeded in pushing the gates closed. But only seconds later there was an almighty crash, and the wooden bar that held the gates shut bowed ominously. The French had succeeded in manoeuvring a battering ram to the main gates, while the defenders' attention was focused on the French soldiers who'd breached the barrack walls. "We should have built a fucking moat," yelled Bartolomeo. "There wasn't time for that." Ezio shouted at the musketeers to divert their fire outside the walls at the gathering French forces. Bartolomeo leapt up the ramparts and stood next to Ezio, who was watching the scene unfolding. French troops had appeared from nowhere, and in great numbers. "We're surrounded!" cursed Bartolomeo, without exaggeration. Behind them, one of the minor gates caved in with a crash and a splintering of timber, and before any of the defenders could do anything to prevent it, a large unit of French infantry stormed in, swords drawn and seemingly willing to fight to the death. This sudden infiltration succeeded in cutting Bartolomeo's quarters off from the rest. "Oh my God, what are they up to now?" shouted Bartolomeo. The assassin soldiers were better trained than the French, and usually more resolved to their cause, but the sheer weight of numbers and the suddenness of the attack had caught them unawares. It was all they could do to hold the line and slowly try to move the French squadron back. The air was thick with the chaos of close-quarters hand-to-hand combat. The space was so crowded that in places the battle had turned into a straightforward fistfight, as there was no longer room to wield weapons. The atmosphere was hot and claustrophobic with the brewing storm. It was as if the gods were frowning on the scene as great storm clouds oppressed the sky overhead. The dust of the parade ground floor rose up like a mist, and the day, which had been so fine only moments earlier, turned dark. Soon afterwards the rain began to fall in torrents, and a pitched battle turned into a confused rout, in which the two opposing forces could barely see what they were doing. The ground turned to mud, and the fighting became more and more desperate and chaotic. Then suddenly, as if the enemy had achieved some purpose, the French trumpets sounded a retreat, and Valois' men withdrew as swiftly as they had arrived. It took a while to restore order, and Bartolomeo's first concern was to order carpenters to replace the shattered gate with a new one. Naturally, they had one ready, in case of just such an eventuality, but it would take an hour to install it. Meanwhile, he led Ezio in the direction of his quarters. "What the hell were they after?" he asked no one in particular. "My maps? They're precious, those maps." He was interrupted by another French fanfare. With Ezio close behind, he ran up one of the stairways leading to a high rampart above the main gate. There, only a short distance away on the scrubby, cypress-scattered plain in front of the barracks, sat the Général Duc Octavien de Valois himself, on horseback, surrounded by a knot of his officers and infantry. Two of the infantrymen were holding a prisoner, whose body was obscured by a sack thrown over the head. "Bonjour, Général d'Alviano," smarmed the Frenchman, looking up at Bartolomeo. "Êtes-vous prêt à vous rendre? Are you ready to surrender?" "Why don't you come a little closer and say that, you crummy little frog?" "Tut, tut, mon général. You really ought to learn French. That might help mask your barbaric sensibilities, mais franchement, je m'en doute." Smilingly, he looked around at his officers, who tittered appreciatively. "Perhaps you could teach me," Bartolomeo hollered back, "and I would instruct you in fighting, since you seem to do so little of it, at least fair and square like a gentleman should." Valois smiled thinly. "Well, cher ami, as amusing as this little parley has been, I see I must repeat my request. I'd like your unconditional surrender by sunrise." "Come and get it! My Lady Bianca will whisper it in your ear." "Ah, I believe another lady might object to that." He nodded to his infantrymen, who pulled the sack off their prisoner. It was Pantasilea. "Il mio marito vi ammazzerà tutti," she spluttered defiantly, spitting pieces of hemp and dust. "My husband will murder you all." It took Bartolomeo a moment to recover from the shock. Ezio grasped his arm, while his men looked at one another, aghast. "I'll kill you for tutto francese!" he screamed. "Dear me, calm down," sneered Valois, "for your wife's sake. And rest assured that no Frenchman would ever harm a woman unnecessarily." His tone became more businesslike. "But even a dunderhead like you can imagine, I think, what will happen if you do not accede to my terms." He kicked his horse's flanks, and prepared to turn away. "Come to my headquarters at dawn, unarmed, and bone up on a little French. Soon all Italy will be speaking it." He raised his hand. The infantryman threw Pantasilea across the back of one of the officers' horses, and the whole party cantered off, the infantry following in its wake. "I'll get you, you pezzo di merda figlio di puttana!" Bartolomeo shouted impotently after them. "That whoreson piece of shit!" he muttered to Ezio before charging off. "Where are you going?" Ezio yelled after him. "To get her back!" "Bartolomeo, wait!" But Bartolomeo ploughed on, and by the time Ezio caught up with him, he was in the saddle, ordering the gates to be opened. "You can't do this alone," pleaded Ezio. "I'm not alone," replied the condottiero, patting Bianca, which hung at his side. "Come with me if you wish, but you'll have to hurry." He spurred on his horse and headed for the now open gates. Ezio didn't even watch him go. He shouted brisk orders to Bartolomeo's captain of cavalry, and within minutes he, Ezio, and a mounted unit of condottieri were galloping out of the barracks in hot pursuit of their leader.